Hello and welcome to Sophy Ridge on Sunday. It's just 7 weeks since the last Conservative leadership contest, but like Groundhog Day, here we are again. We'll know who will take over from Liz Truss as Prime Minister within days, possibly just one, maybe even today. Rishi Sunak is way out in front. He's already got the 100 MPs needed to make it onto a ballot. But the question now is who, if anyone, will join him? Well, Boris Johnson flew back to rally supporters as Conservatives watched on with either excitement or alarm. But Johnson and Sunak held talks last night with rumours of a deal being struck. Penny Mordaunt is the only other contender, but it looks like she may struggle to get over the line. So, a coronation or a contest that could yet inflict more wounds on a deeply damaged Conservative Party? We'll try and find out with our guests this morning. On the show, with all eyes on whether Boris Johnson will run again, we'll talk to the Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris, who is supporting the former Prime Minister. Damian Green was the first Secretary of State and effective Deputy PM under Theresa May. He is now backing Penny Mordaunt. Steve Baker led the Brexiteer cause as chairman of the influential ERG group of Tory MPs. He's now a minister and will also be joining us live. And the first order of the day for the new PM will be dealing with the public finances. So we'll talk to the former Commercial Secretary to the Treasury and Goldman Sachs Chief Economist, Lord Jim O'Neill. And for Labour, we'll be talking to the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Lisa Nandy. Well, let's get straight to that contest, shall we, for the Conservative Party leadership. Rishi Sunak already has more than 120 declared supporting MPs. He also had some crucial backing from the right of the party yesterday, including both Lord Frost and Kemi Badenoch. Now, as former chairman of the ERG group of Brexiteer Tory MPs, Steve Baker wields big influence in those circles. He's now a minister in the Northern Ireland office and joins us now. Thank you very much for being on the programme. I feel like you are one of the few Conservative MPs who it's been quite difficult to predict who you're going to back in this race. You backed Boris Johnson back in 2019. At the last race, you backed Liz Truss via Suella Braverman. Where's your vote going this time?
This time round, I'm very proud to back Rishi Sunak.
And why is that?
That he's going to deliver competent, capable, professional government that we can rely on. If, above all, what we need is stability, we need professionalism, we need to move this country forward from a position of great difficulty, and Rishi's the right guy to do it.
Last time, you supported Suella Braverman, you then switched your vote to Liz Truss. I mean, it felt a little bit like that's kind of anyone but Rishi. So what's changed? No,
that's not the case. So when we got down to Rishi versus Liz, I felt we had two fantastic candidates to offer to the membership. I was backing Liz because that was the choice which Suella and the Eurosceptics made. I was proud to back Liz. But realistically, if you look at the summer, I didn't campaign very hard, and that was because I was very happy with either candidate. And the truth is that it was quite a marginal decision for me, and I'm very proud to back Rishi this time round. OK, now everyone is talking about Boris Johnson. It feels like he is perhaps the biggest threat to Rishi Sunak right now. When he's flying back from his Caribbean holiday, will he or won't you run? Looked in late-night talks with Rishi Sunak. Do you think he would be a good Prime Minister the second time round? There's a lot of love out there for Boris Johnson, and I respect that. I mean, I've been a big fan of Boris Johnson so many times, but this isn't the time for Boris's style. I mean, I'm afraid the trouble is, because of the privileges vote, Boris would be a guaranteed disaster. There's going to be a vote before the House of Commons on this issue of privileges, whether he deliberately misled the House. In that vote, it's guaranteed there'll be a large number of Conservatives who will refuse, as they see it, to lay down their integrity to save him. And at that moment, his premiership will collapse. Now, the best argument I've heard for dealing with that is having the vote on the first day. But that relies on people believing that other MPs think like they do, that you don't vote against a new Prime Minister. But that isn't what will happen. 62 MPs resigned from his government over the Pincher affair, which in the end, whatever one thinks about it, was an issue of conduct and character. Well, those same MPs are not now going to go like lambs through the division lobby. So at that moment that there's a vote in the House of Commons on privilege, his premiership would collapse. It's a guaranteed, nailed-on failure, and we cannot allow it to happen.
So you think that a sizable number of Conservative MPs would actually vote to say that he misled Parliament?
One member of Parliament rang me on Friday to say that they would rather lose the whip than vote for Boris Johnson in that vote. Why? Because they think they're going to lose their seats and they'll need to make a living. And in order to make a living, they'll need their reputations. And this is why they'd rather lose the whip than vote for Boris in that division. So I'm sorry, Voters out there love him, and he's undoubtedly a wonderful man. He lights the room up when he's in the room, but unfortunately he doesn't have that, meticulous compliance with tedious rules. He just doesn't do it, and it's caught up with him. And I'm afraid whatever people would like to be true, we need to just ruthlessly face the truth as it is. And the truth as it is when that vote comes, which it will, his premiership would implode. And this country cannot afford to be back here in a couple of months.
How would you vote in that vote?
Well, it depends exactly what the vote is. But I'm committed that whoever wins this contest, I will give them absolutely all the support I can because it's in the national interest to do so. But equally, I'm not willing to lay down my integrity for Boris Johnson. I'm not. And we'll have to see what any vote is. But really, I want Rishi to win, and I want Conservative members to please engage with this reality. And I know people love Boris, and there'll be people out there leaping to social media to call me all sorts of names under the sun, but that's not important to me. What's important is how this country works out and fares. If Boris is in charge, his premiership will implode and we'll be back here.
And I know, look, we haven't seen the details of the vote, the Privileged Committee, they haven't done their report yet, but you can't rule out voting against him then?
I can't rule it out, no, but look, the truth is the details aren't really important. This isn't actually a legal court case. This is about the politics of whether or not people think that Boris Johnson said, when Boris Johnson said all the rules had been complied with and etc., whether he knew that actually they hadn't been. And the trouble is there's so much evidence out there, I think the public have made their minds up. And apart from anything else, it's just too easy for his opponents, the Labour Party, the SNP, to absolutely make hay over this. And in those circumstances, when everybody's inboxes are filling up, when the evidence can be seen by everyone, it's just inconceivable that those members of Parliament will support Boris.
Now, his supporters, Boris Johnson's supporters, say, look, he is the guy with the mandate. He won that election in 2019. He won all of those seats, many of them who had never voted for the Conservatives before. You've already asked the public to swallow one unelected Prime Minister. Can you really do the same with another?
I really wish we weren't in these circumstances. I really wish we weren't. Liz Truss made a mistake. She went too hard and fast. She said that. She's apologised. I really regret it. I could not have foreseen this would happen. But what I can now foresee is that the best person to be Prime Minister of the UK is Rishi Sunak. I wish we weren't in these circumstances, but it's Rishi. And I think that he will accept that the only set of policies we can carry through are the ones in the manifesto. And I would expect that Rishi will choose to use that mandate to press forward. The public don't like elections, and the idea that we should go straight into election now really is for the birds. We need to give stability to the markets, sort out the public finances post this debacle, and move on.
Do you think Boris Johnson should pull out of the race then?
I think it would be
technically in, I suppose, but
yeah, I think it would be for the best if Boris did something big and statesmanlike. I mean, if he wants to come back as Prime Minister, he would need to do it after this privileges issue is settled. I think he'd make an amazing chairman of the party. Everybody knows he's got huge character, charisma. He lights up any room he's in. Make him chairman of the party. He can lead the campaign. He can front this government. But what we can't do is have him in as Prime Minister in circumstances where he's bound to implode, taking down the whole government with him. And we just can't do that again.
We know, of course, that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak held talks last night. So far, everyone's been very tight-lipped about what those talks actually were about. I don't suppose you've got any intelligence for us? Or?
No, I haven't, no. That would obviously be very big news. And at the moment, until I've come on your programme, I'm not on the campaign. So, I haven't been briefed. But I have spoken to Rishi several times, and I'm confident he'll want to make sure he really does unite the party. And that's why, for example, Simon Hoare and I, on the other end of the spectrum on Brexit, he and I have written an article, should be out as we're speaking, saying that we're coming together behind Rishi and that we both agree that the current policy on the Northern Ireland Protocol must be continued. And I think this is another absolutely crucial point. Whoever wins this contest, the only policy that can be successfully carried through on Northern Ireland is the one that we have. And everyone should understand that. Because if say, Rishi or Penny didn't carry through that policy, the Eurosceptics would implode the government. There's absolutely no doubt. They've been very quiet, but the Eurosceptics really care about this issue of the whole UK leaving the jurisdiction of European law. And again, whatever anyone else may think, my colleagues and friends like Bill Cash and Mark Francois and John Redwood, they are not going to tolerate any diversion, any equivocation on this point. So whether it's Rishi or Penny or Boris, the same policy must be carried forward on the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I'm very pleased that actually Simon Hoare and I have united around this point.
Quite different politicians,
Yeah,
right?
but not that you... Simon's been very generous to me. He's recognised that I have taken some big hits in the apology that I gave to try and change the negotiating dynamic and the friendship between us and Ireland, and it's working. That's great. But I didn't just speak of humility, I also spoke of resolve. Everyone needs to understand that the legitimate interest of unionists is to end the jurisdiction of EU law in Northern Ireland. Now, that's the hardest problem we need to solve. But we will not have devolved government in Northern Ireland until it's done. That means we won't be celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. This is big stuff. And everyone involved needs to understand we can offer both friendship and humility, we can make apologies where they're needed, but in the end, we've got to end the jurisdiction of EU law in Northern Ireland.
Have you had any assurances from Rishi Sunak that he is going to follow through on what you want to see?
Yes, I have. I've spoken to him, I think, 3 times in the last 24 hours, and I'm absolutely not concerned that Rishi will follow through. As he said in public during the summer campaign, he will follow through on the current policy. But again, no one should be in doubt about this. If Simon Hoare and I can agree that the current policy needs to be carried forwards, then the EU, and I hope they'll hear me, the EU should understand there's not going to be a change of policy.
You say that if he doesn't, then the Eurosceptics will effectively, implode.
Well, yeah, and this is me just observing. I mean, people should look at recent history and understand that in similar circumstances, the same effect will happen. We know what a Boris Johnson government will be like. We know how members of Parliament will vote if when the privileges issue comes up. And we know how Eurosceptics will respond if they feel betrayed over the Northern Ireland Protocol. We just know how they will. And this is not an issue for me. I don't ever want to be any part of any kind of rebellion ever again. I've done enough of that for 7 years.
You've done quite a lot of it.
But the point is, what I'm trying to do this morning, I have done a lot, I'm afraid, but what I'm trying to reflect on here is that irrespective of what I think, those Eurosceptic colleagues who I know and love like brothers and sisters, they will absolutely not tolerate any divergence from what we've said we're going to do. And again, look at the recent past. Again, it doesn't matter whether people like it or not, they will do what they will do, and that is they will bring down any Prime Minister who doesn't deliver on this issue.
Now, I've got to ask, Liz Truss has been the shortest-serving Prime Minister ever. We've had an entire budget jumped.
Yeah.
Emergency action by the Bank of England to stop a run on pensions, mortgage costs spiralling.
Yes.
Labour's now leading by over 30 points in the polls, and you backed her at the last leadership election. You've also served, for her as a government minister. Do you take any personal responsibility for what we've seen over the last few months?
I certainly feel personally responsible for helping her become Prime Minister. I did some work in the parliamentary phase and some work in the phase in the country, but I really don't think I can have been expected to foresee that she would go as hard and as fast as she did. I wanted, as I said earlier, I thought they were both fantastic candidates. And I think actually that Liz and Rishi wanted the same destination. I mean, I have discussed with Rishi several times the big problem in the public finances in the long run. But I wanted Liz's change of direction. But I'm afraid when you're trying to shift a supertanker, you can't fly in like Superman and hit it at Mach 2. You just go through the sides and punch a hole, and that's what she's done. So, yeah, I do accept there is some responsibility, but equally, I was not in the Treasury. I didn't sit down with her and Kwasi and do this budget. And I remember standing there as we all heard him make his statement. And unlike a normal financial event, it was largely heard in silence, because I think we all could understand this is spending too much money and cutting too much tax. So, I didn't foresee that happening.
OK. Now, just to finish, this is something else I have to ask. You made a few headlines this week when Christian Guru Murphy called you a four-letter word that I definitely can't repeat on a Sunday morning, which was picked up on an audio feed at Channel 4 News. He's been disciplined for being taken off air for a week. Do you think that's an appropriate action? Well,
it's really a matter for Channel 4. I've accepted his apology, and for me, that's the end of it, and God bless him, since it's a Sunday morning. God bless him. But to be fair to him, I was absolutely tearing strips off him in a live interview. That's because they told me it was a pre-record down the line, and I felt his questions were poor ones. And I was trying to deliberately give him answers he couldn't use in a pre-record. But unfortunately, they put me live on air when telling me it was a pre-record, and the result was that I was tearing strips off him live on air. So I'm not surprised that his blood was up, and I forgive him, and that's the end of it. OK, that's very good. Thank you very much for being on the programme there. Steve Baker revealing he's going to be backing Rishi Sunak in the race to be the next Prime Minister.
Now, just a day before the deadline for nominations, Penny Mordaunt is the only publicly declared contender in the race to be the next Prime Minister, although, of course, all the talk is about Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. But the leader of the House of Commons appears to be struggling to hit the 100 MPs needed. She's currently on around 23. She's also lost some important backers from her last run at the leadership. Well, Damian Green was effectively Deputy Prime Minister under Theresa May. He's pledged his support to Penny Mordaunt. He joins us now. Thank you so much for being on the programme.
Good morning.
So why Penny Mordaunt?
Well, because I think she's the best candidate to unify the party, and looking at the country, in the end, is what matters in this. What we desperately need is a period of calm, competent, stable government. And to do that, you need a united party. And Penny is a candidate who is attracting support from all wings of the party. You've just done an interview with Steve, and he was talking a lot about Eurosceptics and Brexiteers and things. Penny, of course, was a very strong supporter of Brexit. I supported Remain. So, this is a visible sign that Penny is the best placed of all the candidates actually to bring a very fractious party together. But that's worth it in itself. But actually, what I care most about is the country. And unless we have that kind of stable, unified government, then we're not going to be able to stabilise the country. We've got a difficult period ahead. And I think that calm stability is what the next government should aim at, and Penny would provide that.
You say she's attracting support from all wings of the party. I guess the problem is it enough support? Because, has she got the numbers? How many MPs is she on now? I mean,
well, there are a lot more than 23, because a lot of colleagues are not saying, for various reasons. I wouldn't criticise them for that. But it's multiples of 23. I think.
Where would you put it?
We're confident of. I won't reveal numbers, partly because they change by the hour, they grow by the hour. But I'm confident that Penny will get over the line tomorrow.
You think she'll get over 100?
Yes.
OK. So no question of her pulling out today, then rowing in behind another candidate. She's in it to win.
No, she is in it to win.
OK. I just wonder that you're talking there about unity and the importance of what the country needs: stability, unity. With that in mind, is it not in the national interest for Penny to show that unity and row in behind another candidate if it is going to be difficult for her, potentially to go on and win this contest?
Well, I don't think so, because the other A, I think she'll win, but B, we have a process, and if it's all stitched up behind closed doors by big figures at Westminster, then our party members will feel cheated. We do have this two-stage process, and I think it's a sensible innovation that we have this indicative vote, so we will know as MPs who's ahead. But,
the party members might feel a little bit bruised anyway, because you've effectively told them that they got it wrong last time.
Well, we haven't told them that. It did go wrong. Liz admitted mistakes. It's been a terrible few weeks, and she stood down. But I think in this context, what we do need is to respect the process. And if it's an evidence stitch-up, as I say, I think our party membership will be pretty disgruntled about that. And that would be a bad way for a new Prime Minister to set out on the journey.
You are talking about the optics of a stitch-up and how people would react to that. There are obviously reports of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak having talks last night. Do you think that kind of potential deal-making could be seen as a stitch-up? Well,
I don't know. I think none of us knows what happened at those talks or what was discussed, or indeed whether they've stitched anything up. We don't know. But I think the fact that we are talking about it in those terms suggests the danger of that if they turn around and say, right, the two of us have decided what's going to happen to the country, then perhaps many of my colleagues, and certainly the party members, and possibly the country as well, will think, hang on, that's not the way this is supposed to work.
What do you think of the idea of a Boris Johnson Prime Minister, round two?
Well, we saw what happened last time and how the government sort of literally fell apart with 60-odd resignations. So I just don't think it would work. And I think particularly not at this time. I think we all know that there's this Standards Committee investigation going on, and as long as that's going on, there is the possibility of, if he became leader again, then in a couple of months' time we'd all be here again, and absolutely we should not put the country through that.
Now, it's the second time, of course, that Penny Mordaunt ran for the leadership. She, I think, came third last time, fell short, backed Liz Truss. This is what she said about Liz Truss at a hustings in August. Who can lead? Who can deliver? Who does have that bold economic plan our nation needs? I've seen enough to know who that person is, and that is Liz Truss. If Penny Mordaunt genuinely believed that Liz Truss had the bold economic plan our nation needs, what does that say about her judgment?
Well, I think, a majority of people supported Liz. I didn't. I voted for Rishi in that phase, having supported Penny in the previous couple of rounds. And, we had a decision between two candidates. And, Liz herself admits that, she had an economic plan, but tried to do it too far, too fast with the terrible consequences we saw in the markets.
Terrible consequence, as you say, but, Penny Mordaunt sat in the cabinet and she signed off on measures of the budget.
Well, I think one of the things we do know is that the cabinet weren't consulted about that budget, that it was agreed between Liz and Kwasi, and then announced, basically. So I don't hold the cabinet responsible.
She didn't stand up to Liz Truss, did she? She sat in the cabinet, she backed the plans.
Well, the cabinet, I think, met literally 3 times in its whole period. So I think trying to blame members of the cabinet for what's happened over the past 2 months is actually unfair, just for various reasons. They weren't meeting, for obvious reasons, given what else was happening in the world. But I think where we are now, then we need someone who does share the overall vision of a lower tax, smaller state, but who recognises the reality that the most important thing is to stabilise the economy, to make sure that Britain is a credible player in the world again. And Penny has already taken steps. She said she would leave Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor. I think that's a very important step forward. We've seen that Jeremy, with all his experience, has stabilised the pound, stabilised the gilts market. So that is a very strong message to send to the outside world. In the end, although this is an internal party election, it's what happens in the outside world that's going to decide on the success of the next Prime Minister and the next government, and Penny's already taken a significant step forwards to that.
It's interesting to talk about Penny Mordaunt's plans, because I guess the criticism that some MPs have is that they just don't know that much about what her vision is, about what she stands for. I remember at the last leadership election, Ian Duncan-Smith telling me he doesn't know what Penny Mordaunt has achieved in government. Lord Frost said when he worked with her, she wasn't always visible. Sometimes I didn't even know where she was. Is she a bit of a submarine?
Yeah, I think that last criticism is particularly unfair, and I can say that with some authority. I was Secretary of State for Work and Pensions when Penny was the Disabilities Minister, and I didn't know her very well when I went into that job, and I was tremendously impressed both by the effort she put in, the work she put in what's a very difficult brief, but also the imagination she showed. She revived the Disability Confident campaign, and there are tens of thousands of people with disabilities in work today who wouldn't have been had she not done that. So she's a very, very effective operator. And in terms of the vision, she has, if you like, an orthodox conservative vision, a patriotic vision that says that we want to provide opportunity for people, we want to make sure that the public finances are sound, and we want to make sure that Britain can pay its way in the world, can act as a big player in the world, and can do that while trying to keep the state under control, spend every penny of public money effectively. So it's an orthodox conservative vision, but that's what the Conservative Party stands for.
It's interesting listening to what you just said there about opportunity, about patriotism, about public finances. I mean, you could imagine Rishi Sunak saying exactly the same thing. What's the dividing line? What's the reason that people should back Penny Mordaunt other than the front runner?
Well, I think that the difference is that of all the candidates, and there aren't very many, but of the 3 of them, Penny is the one who people will instinctively rally around. We're already talking about the possibility of the other 2 doing a deal to try and unify the party. Penny doesn't need to do deals to unify the party and stabilise the government. Because of what she stands for and because of the work she's done, she can do that herself. And that, I think, makes her the strongest candidate.
Just very quickly, if she doesn't make it, I know you think she will you be backing Rishi Sunak again?
I will see what happens, but I'm not anticipating that, so okay. I haven't thought about it yet.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for being on the programme today. Damian Green there. Right, well, as we have been discussing on the show today, Rishi Sunak and his former boss, Boris Johnson, held talks lasting for hours last night. Now, we still don't know what was discussed, whether Boris Johnson has the numbers to get on the ballot paper either. So let's try and find out, shall we, with someone who knows the former Prime Minister well, the current Northern Ireland Secretary and the former Chief Whip, Chris Heaton-Harris, who joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us. So you're backing Boris Johnson. Just explain to us why.
Because he's a vote winner. He's got a mandate from the last general election. And I know from the reaction that a number of my friends who are MPs who went out canvassing yesterday got on the doorstep that he is still a vote winner today. He's the one person Labour fears.
You know, I'm really happy to have you on the programme because, I know that you are close to Boris Johnson. You served as his chief whip. You delivered him the difficult news last time when you told him that you believed the game was up. So I feel, if anyone's going to know where his head is at, maybe you can help us on that. Is he really going to run?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I really am calling for him to run. I'm trying to work out the numbers, and I think the numbers are actually, Sophie, we do have the numbers, just so you know. Everybody's speculating, but the Rishi camp knows we have the numbers, the Penny camp knows we have the numbers. So that's not an issue. And this is a time when we need a big player like Boris in our politics. So I think he will.
You say that you have the numbers, over 100 MPs. That's what we've been briefed as well. But obviously the declared backers are much, much lower than that. So, we just have to take your word for it. Is it a bit like saying, I have got a girlfriend, but you wouldn't know her, she goes to a different school?
No, I mean, so the one thing I was relatively good at as Chief Whip was numbers. And we definitely have enough numbers to get we've already booked the appointment with Bob Blackman, the Secretary of the 1922 tomorrow. So, yeah, we've got the numbers.
Why are they so shy at being named then?
I'm not sure they're particularly shy. I mean, there's some people who are in government positions and there are some people who might be whips or on the 22 executive or in positions where they don't want to come forward, but they don't have to. I mean, only 2 people actually have to be named on the nomination paper, and in the votes, it's a secret ballot. So I guess you could say a secret ballot is part of democracy, and nominations similarly.
The reason I'm asking about the numbers is because obviously he hasn't declared yet. We haven't got 100 public backers. I'm just trying to work out the seriousness of this leadership campaign. He's kind of flown back dramatically from the Caribbean. He's called up James Duddridge, his ally, saying, "I'm up for it, Dudders," in sort of typical exuberant form. But, I can't work out exactly who his campaign team is, whether he's going to declare, who the 100 backers are. Are we all kind of falling into, the great Boris Johnson soap opera again? I mean, have you spoken to him?
Yeah, I've spoken to him, and I think at this point in time, he's keen to see what the parliamentary party thinks. He is actually a great unifier. He is a great campaigner, and he is someone who has a solid sense of what the country wants to hear and what the country needs to happen. So. Yeah, I mean, he flew back yesterday. To be quite frank, none of us expected this to happen at all. It was one of those weird. I've had plenty of weird times in my recent political career, but it was one of those very weird moments this week where I did not expect Liz Truss to resign on Thursday. So lots has happened in a very short period of time, and the fact that we've got the numbers after such a short period of time with no campaign, with very little organisation, and realistically just a few people calling around demonstrates to me the support for Boris Johnson that's in the parliamentary party. Also demonstrates to me the amount of email and social media traffic that we're all getting now demonstrates to me that he's really popular in the country too.
He had talks with Rishi Sunak last night. Everyone's been very tight-lipped about what's happened. We don't know what happened. You say that you've spoken to him. Do you have any steer on what did actually go on last night?
I know they had talks, but you'll have to forgive me. I was doing something a bit more social with a nephew's 21st birthday last night. So I feel like I got up a bit early just to be on here, Sophie, because I had a very good fun time with my nephew last night.
OK, well, we appreciate the early alarm in that situation. Do you think if Rishi Sunak offered him a job in his cabinet, that Boris Johnson would accept it, or is he only interested in the top job?
No, I mean, to answer your question seriously, the last question seriously, I mean, I was really pleased that they had talks. I honestly don't know what transpired from those talks, and I will be speaking to Boris quite shortly. And I'd like to these things. I think it's really important that the party unifies and comes together. And I really do think it's important that the country gets the message that we are serious about governing and we are serious about sorting out the economic situation we find ourselves in that has changed so dramatically in such a short period of time, that we're serious about dealing with the international factors that contribute to that, that we have a leader that's going to be unbelievably strong when it comes to supporting Ukraine and facing down Putin, that we have an understanding of the economic situation we find ourselves in. And so, yeah, I want those talks between Rishi and Boris to continue, because I think, and indeed to involve Penny, because these are all big players in our future. And if they came together, I think it would be a dramatic turn for the better for us all.
You're talking about Boris Johnson being an election winner. You talk about his action on Ukraine. You could talk about his understanding of the economic situation. And I really want to ask the question that I actually think is really important, because, we get sucked into all this drama. What actually is the economic strategy that Boris Johnson is running on? Because I don't know. What is it?
Well, I mean, to be frank, we've only been working at a campaign for 24 hours. As a member of the government, I don't think the economic strategy can change much, because we need to make sure that our economy is completely stable. So, currently, Jeremy Hunt is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Ed Argar, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, are working on an economic plan for the medium term. And I'm quite sure that all the candidates will want to commit to something like that, because that's what we want to make sure that we have a stable economy to build forward on.
So will Boris Johnson commit to the Jeremy Hunt plan? Because it feels quite important, if you're going to back him, say he should be the next Prime Minister, to know.
Yeah, he wants. Boris absolutely wants a stable financial and economic background for the country to move forward on. And to me, and obviously we don't know what, as a campaign team that's only been formed 24 hours and been making telephone calls, we've not had privy information as to what that might look like, and nor should we have. But as a member of the government, I think Jeremy Hunt's plan is probably the best one in town.
You should know, though, shouldn't you? If you're going around calling people, asking them to put their faith in Boris, you should know exactly what his economic plan is, shouldn't you? I mean, the Bank of England had to step in to stop a run on pension funds recently.
Yeah, and the economic plan that will be based on stability for the economy. But as I say, the only plan that's being worked on currently, with all the detail that you need to have an economic plan, is the one that Jeremy Hunt's working on now.
OK. I want to talk a little bit more about what a Boris premiership could mean. We had Steve Baker on the programme at the beginning of the show. He's backing Rishi Sunak. He said that it would be a disaster if Boris Johnson would be Prime Minister because of the Privileges Committee. He said he couldn't rule out voting against the Prime Minister if he felt that he had misled Parliament. He said that other Conservative MPs would be in the same situation. At a time when the country is in the situation that it is, after all that the Conservative Party have put it through over the last couple of months, is it really responsible to put in power someone who could end up being found guilty of misleading Parliament and suspended from Parliament as a result?
Yeah, I mean, let's put all this into some context. So, firstly, Boris was happy for the Privileges Committee investigation to be set up. Conservative Party MPs did not have to vote on that. Secondly, he's he's been working over the summer. He's absolutely sure that he's going to be exonerated. Thirdly, we are very happy for the Privileges Committee to continue its work. He wants the Privileges Committee to continue its work because he believes he will be exonerated, as do I. And then fourthly, I don't know what this vote is that people are talking about immediately as we get back. Privileges Committee has not started its work properly yet. There's a long way to go. Evidence will be taken. I'm sure there'll be one or two press columns written about it, and I'm sure, Sophie, you'll have some time on your show dedicated to it. But only if the Privileges Committee were to find him in some way in error would there be any worry about a penalty at all. And I don't believe that will be the case. So you're talking, I think, about many, many months down the line that it's just a theoretical possibility.
We can't, just underplay the importance of this, though, can we, as well? Boris Johnson quit when his own MPs lost confidence in him. He was the only serving Prime Minister to have been found to have broken the law. People like William Hague, for example, saying on Friday he risks sending the party into a death spiral. Is he really the answer to the problems the Conservative Party now faces?
Well, there's polling today that suggests very strongly that he is. Without any campaigning, just flying back from the Dominican Republic, there's polling that suggests that he pulls us back within 26 seats if there was a general election called tomorrow of Labour, and that's without him saying a single word.
According to that polling.
So yeah, according to that polling. So. But Boris Johnson is unbelievably popular with the public. He can connect with the public like a few other politicians of my generation, and I doubt we'll see anyone like him again. He has a mandate with the British people. He won the 2019 election with a massive 80-seat majority, unheard of since the times of Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. And this is a man who actually does know how to govern, who can govern, and given the chance, would happily govern again.
Things were very different back in 2019, though, as I'm sure you will admit, when Boris Johnson did win that election, not just because he was up against Jeremy Corbyn as well. Boris Johnson actually only had positive approval ratings for a few months. By January this year, they were minus 52. That's lower than Theresa May or David Cameron ever got. That's why your colleagues got rid of him.
We were 4 or 5 points behind in the polls as well, but. I'd like to think when you get to a general election, everybody's mind concentrates on first of all what's best for the country, and indeed what sort of prime minister they would like. Now Boris Johnson has demonstrated that he can touch like the Heineken of British politics. His popularity can touch anywhere in the country whatsoever. He can get absolutely anywhere, get votes from anywhere. He is still that popular now. He can demonstrate to the parliamentary party. He's a man that everybody wants to talk to. He's a man that lights up a room when he comes into it. So yeah, he can pull this around, and he has already a track record of delivery on Brexit, on COVID, on dealing with the first ramifications that flowed from Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. So there's a whole host of things, delivery and indeed hope for the future, that Boris gives us.
Would you like to see him offer the chancellorship to Rishi Sunak if he does make it?
I'd very much like the two of them, and as I say, Penny as well, because I think Penny's got is a great talent, and we have got some amazing talents in our party. I'd like to see everybody work together so we can move on from the position we're in now.
Jacob Rees-Mogg's been pictured with the slogan "Boris or bust." That doesn't sound like someone who is working together, does it?
Yeah, but I've got to say, our mini campaign does not have an official slogan or anything like that. So that was just something someone else had mocked up. Jacob used it. I think that's a bit unfortunate, personally, but it's just you can't stop people being enthusiastic about Boris.
OK, and now I want to ask you a question with your Northern Ireland hat on. You're obviously the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and you've said that there will be an election triggered if the Assembly there doesn't manage to get up and running. You, of course, are currently a Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. That could change in a couple of days' time. Whoever is in that job, what do you think we need to see now?
So the election would be called because actually it's a legal requirement. It's primary legislation that if 6 months passes without an executive reforming for the Northern Ireland Assembly after the previous election, then an election has to be called. So it's actually a legal requirement to call it at 1 minute past midnight on the 28th of October. And so whoever sits in the seat of the Northern Ireland Secretary at that time, and I truly hope it's me, but who knows, you will be in that position. So the Democratic Unionist Party have got an opportunity to come back in. It's really important, actually, that I think that they do, because there's so many domestic issues in Northern Ireland that would be helped by their re-entry into the executive. And they've got some really talented politicians themselves who can help sort those issues out. So there is a choice that people can make to stop there being an election, but it's got to be made by elected representatives of Northern Ireland going back in to that assembly. So without that, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland would have to call an election this week.
And just finally, while I've got you, why was Boris Johnson on holiday when Parliament was sitting?
Well, it would have been slipped. So yeah, I think you'll find a number. We've got a couple of former prime ministers now sitting on the backbenches, and because they are truly big beasts in our parliamentary system, as a chief whip, if one of them asked you if they could have some time off to do something, you'd normally say yes.
What does slip mean? You mean he would have got permission to go off on a nice holiday?
Yes, you get permission to go away.
Okay.
So we get
permission
to go campaigning, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Permission to go on holiday is usual then.
It's a thing.
Okay. All right. Chris Heaton-Harris, thank you very much for being on the programme today.
My pleasure.
Chris Heaton-Harris there saying that Boris Johnson does have the numbers. He is confident to make it through onto the ballot. Well, whoever manages to get the top job, the absolute first thing in an extremely difficult intro for the new Conservative leader will be the economy. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has already warned of decisions of an eye-watering difficulty, and a combination of spending cuts and tax rises are expected imminently, with a fiscal statement due in just 8 days' time. So how much room for manoeuvre is there for whoever wins the contest? Well, we're joined now by the former Commercial Secretary to the Treasury under Prime Ministers David Cameron and Theresa May, Lord Jim O'Neill, who was also the chief economist at Goldman Sachs. Conservative peer, now sits as a crossbencher in the House of Lords. Thank you very much for being with us on the programme today. Well, it's the great grudge match, isn't it? Boris Johnson versus Rishi Sunak. But, behind the soap opera, things are really, really serious. The new Prime Minister will inherit an extremely difficult economic situation. Who would you like to see become the next Prime Minister?
Well, in your intro, you described me as a crossbencher, so I think consistent with me sitting on the independent crossbenchers, I shouldn't really have an opinion on such matters, I suppose. But I think if you look at what each has said about these issues in the past, Rishi obviously would be the safer pair of hands. And in many ways, what Jeremy Hunt has announced since he appeared on the scene, what is it, only just over a week ago, it seems forever. It's effectively what Rishi suggested would have to be the case when he was campaigning in the summer. So I think certainly fair enough to say that the markets are conditioned for the kind of view that Rishi would currently have. Whereas with Boris, as we know, we don't quite know what you're going to get, let's say.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Chris Heaton-Harris saying that he thinks that Boris will stick to the Jeremy Hunt plan, but we haven't really, as you said, had a nailed-down explanation of what that economic vision could be. Do you think that might make the markets a bit nervous?
There are lots of other issues going on. On Friday, I read summaries about the markets being worried again because of the appearance of Boris in the campaign. But there's also a lot going on in the US and in China, and also tricky issues looming in Japan with financial markets. So you have to be careful. Some days, big moves happen that affect our markets that have nothing to do with us. But all of that said, the markets, because of the remarkable self-inflicted damage of the past few weeks, are looking for fiscal credibility in the UK. And they're sort of they were assuming till Thursday we were going to get it, but it's very hard to see that if Boris appears on the scene, first of all, Jeremy Hunt would necessarily stay as Chancellor. And if Boris would want to go back to everything he said, as it's been a consistent theme of many, how can he do all these things about spending everywhere and keep taxes low? And they don't really go together. And at the end of the day, the big issue facing any leader in the foreseeable future is we have a conflict between promises of taxes to be as low as possible, a very strong public appetite for spending, and fiscal credibility, and some things have to give, obviously. And then on top of that, and I really do think it's very sad given the self-inflicted mess, there is an urgent need to somehow get out of this productivity trap that the country's in, and somebody do something to take us out of it. And I did personally advocate to the Treasury Select Committee earlier this year that
Unfortunately, it does look like that link, we're having a few problems with the link to Jim O'Neill there, unfortunately. We will let you know if that is re-established. OK, well, let's try again. Cross our fingers. Technical gremlins all over the place, but we can see you, so let's hope...
Hi, I'm back.
Excellent, good stuff.
Yeah, I'm here.
You were just talking about the sort of economic picture. How big is, the black hole in the public finances, and how do you think it should be dealt with?
At the short term, because of what's happened, the country is going to have to undertake fiscal consolidation and fiscal credibility above all else. And so there's something along the lines of what the OBR has set out and what Jeremy Hunt has said he's going to do. I don't really see how we can veer away from that without an even worse reaction from the financial markets, unfortunately. Sadly, it's only because of the nature and the style in which the self-inflicted mess of the previous leadership brought it around, because we do need to do something to boost our productivity rate. And I think there is a case for a different approach to fiscal behaviour, particularly a case for much bigger government spending. And at some point, some government is going to have to do that in this country. But I think that option is off the table for whoever wins the leadership in the next few days here.
You've been, a big backer of the levelling up agenda. You're vice chair of the Northern Powerhouse. Are you worried what spending cuts could mean to that agenda?
Well, I'm worried specifically about that, of course. And I'm also worried more broadly that it sort of takes us back to where we were in style to 2010. And there are lots of major economic challenges, including, obviously, the financing of the health and social needs, as well as these mammoth geographic inequalities in the country. And we're only going to be able to really solve them if a very patient source of investment capital appears. And that very patient source is the government. But I can't see, given the damage the government has created for itself and for the country's reputation, how they can execute such a program in the very short term without much bigger tax increases. But what I think should also therefore happen as soon as some kind of proper stability and political stability and fiscal credibility is established is there's some kind of request for a review of the fiscal policy framework where you actually, as opposed to just announce some random thing, you ask all the expert players like the OBR, maybe the Bank of England, is there scope for having, let's call it a modern version of the Gordon Brown golden rule where government can invest more? Because that's the only way we're going to get out of this productivity trap, in my opinion.
But doesn't that mean more borrowing, which is what got us into this mess in the first place?
Well, yeah, of course it does. But I think there is a very clear case for more borrowing for investment spending, where I would guess most economists you would quiz would believe there are what economists would describe are positive multiplier effects, which means the future growth performance from that investment spending will benefit quite clearly. And you'd have to do it in a really sound, transparent and approved way by the likes of the OBR. Otherwise, it would be problematical. But I think the case at some stage to go down that path is very, very strong. But I don't think it's an option that faces this incoming leader because of the mess his or her colleagues have created for them.
What do you think is likely to happen to mortgages and also perhaps house prices as well, in the short term or medium term?
I think the best that could be said is if whoever wins follows through with, let's call it, Jeremy Hunt-style promises, mortgage rates will now not go up as much as they almost definitely would have done 2 weeks ago. And if you look carefully at what happened in the markets over the course of the week, there's been a slight reduction in the peak of interest rates in the next 12 months that the markets have priced. And if you look at what a couple of Bank of England MPC members said towards the end of the week, they were implying, I emphasise, implying that they might not tighten as much as otherwise if we restore fiscal credibility.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Really fascinating to talk and to get your take on all of that. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's been a programme dominated by the Conservative Party leadership contest so far, but let's turn to Labour, shall we? The party has extended its record poll leads even further this week. But how will the opposition react to yet another new Conservative Party leader? And who do they fear the most? Well, we can talk now to the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Lisa Nandy, who is in Wigan today. Thank you for being with us this morning. Well, the drama of the Conservative leadership contest has really been about Boris Johnson, hasn't it? Will he, won't he run? Is he flying back from holiday in the Caribbean, telling colleagues he's up for it? Are we all back within the Boris Johnson soap opera?
I mean, the drama is just incredible. The only thing it's not been about is the country. And meanwhile, you've got people whose mortgage payments have gone up by more than £500 on average a month. You've got people paying a very, very heavy price for this ongoing chaos in the Tory party. And whether it's Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak or any of the other contenders who've been floating around this weekend, essentially what the Tory party is about to do is bring the arsonists in to try and put out the fire that they started. It's just not good enough. We need not just a change of Prime Minister, we need a change of government.
Some in your party, though, would say that Boris Johnson is actually the greatest threat to Labour. I just want to have a look. Here's Angela Rayner on LBC in July. Boris had this Teflon coating. It's like a little magic where he was able to get through to the public. Boris had so much going for him. He got an 80-seat majority and the country was really behind him. Here's Lucy Powell in House magazine. Boris, in his heyday, was a very formidable campaigner. He was able to reach parts of the country that other Conservatives hadn't and wouldn't be able to reach. Do you agree with your colleagues?
Well, he undeniably won a big majority at the last election, and then very, very quickly the wheels came off the wagon. I wouldn't trust Boris Johnson to run a bath, let alone run the country. He degraded and debased our politics. He lost all of that goodwill from the country and from his own colleagues in a very short space of time. It's extraordinary watching Tory MPs who put in letters of no confidence in him just a few weeks ago, saying he wasn't fit to hold the highest office, now talking openly about trying to bring him back. It's a sign of absolute, utter desperation in the Tory party. It's time that the public were brought back into this conversation, because there is a clear choice between a Tory party that have crashed the economy and presided over 12 years of chaos, bringing our National Health Service to its knees and soaring crime rates, and a Labour Party that could bring calm and stability back to the markets, be careful and sensible with every single penny that we spend, because it's people's money and they haven't got a lot of it.
You obviously want a general election, that is very clear. But, with your sort of public responsibility hat on, you're talking there about how difficult things are for people. We do need stability. It's been a difficult couple of months, to say the very, very least. Who do you hope becomes the next Prime Minister next week?
Well, Keir Starmer is the obvious answer.
Because that's the obvious answer, but he's not going to be the Prime Minister next week, is he?
Well, the truth is it makes absolutely no difference at all who the Tory party choose, because even before they crashed the economy and left working people paying the price, we've had 12 years of low growth and the highest tax burden on working people in 70 years. They haven't got a clue how to set this right, because they're the people who created this problem in the first place. We've got to get good jobs back into every community in this country and get the economy firing on all cylinders again. We could become a world leader in clean energy. There are 1 million good jobs on the road to net zero, and we will invest to bring them here. You just heard Jim O'Neill saying there's a strong case for investment to rebuild the fabric of this country from the ground up. That is what is at stake for this country. We've got a clear choice to make, and that's why we're arguing for a general election, not because there's a lot at stake for the Labour Party, but because there's so much at stake for the country.
You say that it wouldn't make any difference who the next Conservative Prime Minister is. I mean, that's not really true, is it? Look, I get that you really want Keir Starmer in there. I get your frustrations that there's another leadership contest going on without a general election. But obviously, it would make a difference who wins the contest, wouldn't it, for the country?
I don't think so. When you've got a government that is completely out of energy and out of ideas, whoever becomes leader of the Conservative Party in the next week or so is going to inherit the same problem. It's not just that they've crashed the economy and now they've got to find money from somewhere, whether it's raising taxes on working people or cutting public services, as Jeremy Hunt has been floating. It's not just that they've got a very divided Tory party, it's that they've got the same tired, failed ideology that got us into this mess in the first place. The idea that you can grow the economy by investing in a small handful of people, in a small number of sectors, in one small corner of the country, and the benefits of that will trickle down to the rest of us, it just demonstrably has not worked. We say that every person and every place has a contribution to make to the future of this country, and that's why we're going to invest to bring those good jobs to Britain, get money back into people's pockets and get the economy growing again.
OK, well, let's have a look at Labour's economic plan then, shall we? You're sort of positioning yourselves as the party of fiscal responsibility. We know that there is a fiscal tightening on its way, really whoever wins, but certainly if Rishi Sunak does. The spending review no longer applies. Departments have been asked to find efficiency savings. Would Labour spend more money on public services than the Conservatives?
Well, we've already set out plans to get money into the National Health Service by scrapping non-dom tax status, which we think will raise about £3 billion, and spending roughly half of that on getting more health visitors, more training, more doctors and nurses into the NHS, because we face a crisis this winter. We've got more than 1 million people on waiting lists, and we've got to do something to act now. But what we're really interested in is how you can reform public services. Jeremy Hunt, who's currently the Chancellor, is the person who failed to invest in the National Health Service, didn't bring it up to speed with digitalisation, so that we're spending more to do less. That's why we've said we'll prioritise. When we do borrow, we're not going to borrow for day-to-day spending. We're not going to live out with our means, but we are going to prioritise getting investment into the economy so that we can get public services working far more efficiently and help to people who need it at the moment they need it, not waiting until people hit crisis point before we intervene, which is far more costly and so damaging.
So is that yes, then? You would spend more money on public services than the Conservatives?
Well, we're not going to borrow to fund day-to-day spending. It's the consequences of doing that when you haven't costed it and you don't know how you're going to pay for it are very severe. We've just seen that. They literally crashed the economy with a multi-billion-pound package that they couldn't cost, they couldn't fund. And ultimately, all that help that was promised, those help with energy bills, they just couldn't deliver. When we make promises, we intend to keep them. And that's why every single thing that we propose between now and the next general election will be fully costed, fully funded, and we'll publish an assessment in government of the impact that will have on the wider economy as well.
OK, because obviously, if everything is going to be fully costed, if you aren't going to be borrowing to fund day-to-day spending, we all know there's a big black hole in the public finances, around £40 billion. That's even after Jeremy Hunt reversed the mini-budget. It was around £60 billion before that, according to the IFS. Would you put up taxes in order to try and plug that black hole?
Well, we've already said that we would expand the windfall tax on the big energy producers in order to get more money back into people's pockets and off their energy bill. Sure, but this is the point, isn't it? I'm not I'm not sorry that we're going to be careful with people's money, because it is their money and they haven't got a lot of it. And the last thing that this country needs is more reckless spending when the government has just crashed the economy by saying that they'll target tax cuts to the richest and then couldn't work out how they were going to pay for it. Of course we'll invest in our public services. We built the National Health Service, we created comprehensive education in this country, and in 1997, after years of the Tories degrading our public services, we came in and rebuilt them from the ashes of the Thatcher era. Of course we'll prioritise that, and that's why we said that we would scrap non-dom status and get money into the NHS. It said that we would end the arcane system where you've got police forces up and down the country all procuring their own services separately, which wastes a huge amount of money, and we'll bring those things together in order to get more police onto the streets through the savings that we make there. But we're going to think creatively and smartly about how we spend every precious penny, and we're going to prioritise rebuilding this country, the fabric of this country, from the ground up.
OK, just finally, you want an election. How are you going to get one? Are you going to call a vote?
It's entirely up to Tory MPs now. The tragic fact is that the future of this country lies in the hands of a small number of people who are currently putting party before country. We're calling on them to put country before party and do the right thing. They know that Britain can't go on like this. Everybody in this country knows that Britain can't go on like this. And it is unconscionable that we're going to bring back one of the old, tired, failed leaders from the past in order to put out the fire that they started. We all know it's not going to work. Tory MPs know in their heart of hearts it's not going to work, and it is time for a general election.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Lisa Nandy there, talking to us from Wigan today.
Thank you.
Well, that is it for this week's Sophy Ridge on Sunday. In a moment after the break, we're going to be running through today's interviews, because there was some pretty spicy ones on the show today, I have to say. We will be joined by our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, here in the studio. Thanks for joining us this Sunday morning. Welcome to Sophy Ridge on Sunday, The Take, where we take you back through the morning's interviews with some analysis from our political team. Today we're joined by Ali Fortescue.
Hello.
I'm very pleased to say. Good to see you, Ali. What a morning. Well, I mean, I guess the big question today, the question that I want to know is, does Boris have the numbers? I'll admit I've been quite sceptical, which maybe came across in some of the interviews this morning. I think I said that, it's a bit like saying you've got a girlfriend but they go to a different school. Like, how can we believe that when they say he's got the numbers unless we know who they are? But he's had another backer, hasn't he?
Yeah, Nadeem Zahawi. This is significant. He is the Chancellor to the Duchy of Lancaster, senior figure in the Tory party. He's just come out on Twitter backing Boris Johnson. So that adds to, you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nadine Dorries, Ben Wallace suggesting he'd back Boris. These are big names. I think it is really difficult to know what the numbers are because, of course, we sort of publicly have, I think we're hovering, where are we now, 57. He says his team say he's got more than 100. You had Chris Heaton-Harris saying that this morning. Someone close to him yesterday told me he had 102. I think what's obvious is that every vote will count for Boris Johnson. If he does get there, it could be by 1 or 2 votes.
It's going to be close, isn't it?
It is going to be close. But at the moment, we don't know for sure. It seems like he has a sort of pretty solid core, is what people say, of 60 or so backers.
So this is the tweet from Nadeem Zahawi. I'm backing Boris. He got the big calls right, whether it was ordering more vaccines ahead of more waves of COVID, arming Ukraine early against the advice of some, or stepping down for the sake of unity. But now Britain needs him back. We need to unite to deliver on our manifesto. He goes on to say it's a two-tweet thread. He says, when I was Chancellor, I saw a preview of what Boris 2.0 would look like. He was contrite and honest about his mistakes. He'd learned from those mistakes how he could run Number 10 and the country better. With a unified team behind him, he is the one to lead us to victory and prosperity. Nadeem Zahawi there. I mean, it is important to say, isn't it, that, look, Nadeem Zahawi is one of... He's close to Boris Johnson, isn't he?
Yeah.
So it's not a massive, surprise. Same with Ben Wallace. These are people who know Boris Johnson well. I guess the question is, are there enough waverers that he could pick up?
Yeah, I think, the thing with Boris Johnson is he really brings out really strong feelings on both sides. People feel passionately one way or the other. People that don't back him say, hold on, this is a guy that just a few months ago, 60 ministers resigned under. Would he actually be able to sort of form a government? Would he be able to get enough good people in his team? And, there's one person that I spoke to yesterday, one MP, who's really quite upset by the idea of him coming back. Some people say they'd leave the parliamentary party altogether. He is divisive, but then there are those that passionately back him. But, yeah, as you say, could there be some career-minded MPs that sense that there's some momentum, perhaps, and row in behind Boris Johnson? I don't think it would by any means be an easy victory, as I said.
Yeah, Ali, thank you so much. We're having lots more from Ali as the show goes on. I was just talking about strong feelings, and I have to say there were some strong feelings on display with our first guest this morning, Steve Baker. Now, he was someone who I was really interested to hear from. He backed Boris Johnson in 2019. He was kind of instrumental, really, in that victory. He was also quite instrumental in Liz Truss's victory, along with Suella Braverman, who he backed the first time round. He then swung in behind Liz Truss. So he's a big figure among the kind of right of the party, if you like, the ERG group, the so-called group of Brexit supporting MPs on the party's right. So I was interested to know, would he back Boris? Would he back Rishi?
So when we got down to Rishi versus Liz, I felt we had 2 fantastic candidates to offer to the membership. I was backing Liz because that was the choice which Suella and the Eurosceptics made. I was proud to back Liz. But realistically, if you look at the summer, I didn't campaign very hard, and that was because I was very happy with either candidate. And the truth is that it was quite a marginal decision for me, and I'm very proud to back Rishi this time round.
To back Rishi this time round, according to Steve Baker. But I think what was perhaps the kind of most explosive part of the interview, I guess, was when I asked him about Boris Johnson, whether or not he would support Boris Johnson returning to Downing Street as Prime Minister. Let's take a listen.
I've been a big fan of Boris Johnson so many times, but this isn't the time for Boris's style. I mean, I'm afraid the trouble is, because of the privileges vote, Boris would be a guaranteed disaster.
Guaranteed disaster. Well, let's bring in Ali, shall we? Now, we should give a bit of background to this, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
The privileges vote is when the committee decides whether or not he misled Parliament.
Yeah, that's right. So this all harks back to Partygate. Did Boris Johnson knowingly mislead Parliament when he said that no rules were broken? So they're going to be hearing evidence from witnesses. This could drag out. This could be painful for Boris Johnson to see people from his own team come out and brief against him publicly. And potentially, if he is found to have misled Parliament, he could even be suspended. He could even see a by-election in his seat. I mean, we're not there yet, but that is something extraordinary that a Prime Minister would have to go to, and that's something that's coming up again and again.
And it was kind of extraordinary to hear from Steve Baker, who said that, look, he thinks there are enough people on the Conservative benches who would vote against Boris Johnson, and he couldn't rule it out himself either, because he said it was about people's integrity.
Extraordinary, and again, brings up strong feelings on both sides. I think the question people have is, what is Boris Johnson going to do to show that he's actually changed? And I think people, his relationship's always been quite transactional, and there is some evidence now that he might not do as well as the polls as he did last time. Certainly, the by-elections and the polling before he stepped down suggests that. Chris Heaton-Harris was talking to you, saying that this is someone that lights up the room. In fact, I think Steve Baker might have said that again.
He did, he did, yeah.
But his critics will say that actually he's damaged goods, that he is poison in the bloodstream of the party, and they can't deal with, he is not the person that can unite around him.
Let's talk a bit about the Chris Heaton-Harris interview, shall we? Because I thought it was quite interesting, actually. I feel like I learned some stuff from it. Chris Heaton-Harris, big ally of Boris Johnson. He was his chief whip. So, back in the time when they were in the trenches together, Boris Johnson was clinging on, trying to work out if he could stay. It was Chris Heaton-Harris who went to him and said, look, you don't have the numbers. And he now says Boris Johnson does have the numbers. But do we trust him?
I mean, I thought that was... My ears sort of pricked up when I heard that, because, as you say, former chief whip, someone that knows the numbers. It was interesting to hear from Lord Hayward this morning too, pollster, Tory, who was saying... He said to me after, he could sort of scrump together and just about get over the line. It's not going to be easy, but I think it's possible. And I think, Chris Heaton-Harris... Also, again, talking about elections, but I think, the big things that have changed are Corbyn and Brexit, and those aren't the big factors anymore if Boris Johnson does go to the polls.
Yeah, let's have a quick listen to Chris Heaton-Harris, shall we? Let's have a listen. You say that you have the numbers, over 100 MPs, that's what we've been briefed as well, but obviously the declared backers are much, much lower than that. So, we're just having to take your word for it. Is it a bit like saying, I have got a girlfriend, but you wouldn't know her, she goes to a different school?
No, I mean, so the one thing I was relatively good at as chief whip was numbers. And we definitely have enough numbers to get we've already booked the appointment with Bob Blackman, the Secretary of the 1922 tomorrow. So, we've got the numbers.
Well, he says he's confident. We're going to find out soon, aren't we? Ali, the other thing I've got to ask you as well is we know that they were locked in these talks last night. Now, I thought that maybe if Boris Johnson doesn't have the numbers, that we're going to come out today and have some kind of deal struck between the two men. Maybe they'd accept a job in exchange for backing the other candidates. Do we know anything about what went on?
Well, I mean, it sounds like there's no sort of clear deal. I mean, certainly, this is amazing because this is all happening behind closed doors. They haven't even said they're running yet. The only person we know is running is Penny Mordaunt.
He was exactly lagging behind in terms of MPs. The person who's least likely to be Prime Minister.
I mean, it is incredibly strange, this whole thing. We do understand that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak spoke last night. I mean, there's not much love lost between these two. Plenty of Boris allies see Rishi Sunak as a man that stabbed him in the back, the man that brought about his downfall. I find it hard from the conversations I've had to see either Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak serving in the other one's cabinet. I think they both want the top job.
Extraordinary stuff. Absolutely extraordinary, Ali. And as you say, the fact that we've only got one contender formally announced and it's all going to start tomorrow, I can't get my head around it. And only 7 weeks since the last one. It's incomprehensible, but this time tomorrow, what time is it? We might have a sense, we might know who's actually running in this. We hope we know who's running.
Yeah, people might say, Boris Johnson won't run if he doesn't think he can actually get on the ballot. He won't want to come second place, particularly to Rishi Sunak.
Yes, that's true.
Things are going to have to move quite quickly because there's not long till we actually know.
Great stuff. Really interesting to talk, Ali. Well, coming after the break, we're going to have even more on the leadership contest that is dominating everything this morning.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Wall Street! High Street!
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, his memories is all gone.
In almost every corner, this town has been completely destroyed by the fire. I've witnessed a remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
It's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
I report on the biggest stories from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet. Yeah, I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations here. What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here knows the truth of ISIS.
Hello, welcome back to Sophy Ridge on Sunday The Take, where we take you back through the morning's interviews with some analysis from our political team and myself as well. And today we've got Ali Fortescue with us on set. So you were saying before the break that the only declared candidate, astonishingly so far, is actually Penny Mordaunt. How are her numbers looking?
So, I mean, her campaign this time round, she had great momentum in the summer at the start. She came third. She got 105 MPs backing her in the last round. So she could have made it onto the ballot, but she has just lacked momentum this time round. She's been hovering around 20 votes for about a day. I mean, people like David Davis, he was one of her key backers last time. He's now switched and he's on Team Rishi. So it just feels like things could change. It feels like she's not going to get there right now.
It's quite interesting, isn't it, with Penny Mordaunt, because, as you say, she's lost some of her backers from last time. Caroline Noakes, another one who's backed Rishi, not her. I just wondered, do you think that it's damaged her a bit, the fact that she went in behind Liz Truss last time? A lot of her support seems to be from the kind of One Nation group. People like Damian Green, who we'll hear from in a minute, who backed Rishi Sunak after she dropped out.
I think that's a really interesting point. I wonder if perhaps some of those that are pretty against Liz, I think people also just realise that something has to change, and I think people really feel vindicated by what happened under Liz Truss, and they can see, some see that Rishi Sunak got it right. So, and I think you're starting to see people know this is going to go one way or another, and they have to get in those camps if they're going to either stop Boris Johnson or stop Rishi Sunak.
Yeah.
And I think part of this as well is what there isn't is people that feel very strongly against Penny Mordaunt, I'd say, whereas I think there are people that certainly did feel quite strongly against Rishi Sunak, and definitely people that feel strongly against Boris Johnson. So I think a lot of this is they want to stop the other person from getting in.
Yeah, and as you say, it's all about momentum, isn't it? You back the person who you think is most likely to do that, and if she's lagging behind a bit, I think, is it going to be a wasted vote? Let's have a listen to Damian Green, shall we? Now, he is one of Penny Mordaunt's supporters. He says he's in no doubt she has got the numbers.
A lot of colleagues are not saying for various reasons. I wouldn't criticise them for that. But it's multiples of 23. I think.
Where would you put it?
We're confident of. I won't reveal numbers, partly because they change by the hour, they grow by the hour. But I'm confident that Penny will get over the line tomorrow.
You think she'll get over 100?
Yes.
OK. So no question of her pulling out today, then rowing in behind another candidate. She's in it to win.
No, she is in it to win. Penny doesn't need to do deals to unify the party and stabilise the government. Because of what she stands for and because of the work she's done, she can do that herself. And that, I think, makes her the strongest candidate.
Well, Ali, he said he was confident. I don't think he sounded that confident. What do you think? You know, he was saying multiples of 20. I'm not going to get into numbers because they change and they grow by the hour. I'm not sure how confident he sounded.
As you say, people see the way the wind is blowing, people see momentum. You need to show that you can get there, that there's a point in backing Penny. So inevitably, people that are behind her want to show that she's doing well. I didn't think he sounded totally convinced. I don't think she is there right now. That doesn't mean that things can't change very quickly. We've seen that happen a lot in the past. But there is pressure on her now to row in behind one of the other candidates. I think there's definitely pressure for her to row in behind Rishi Sunak. There's no indication at all that she would do that. But she has been interviewed this morning. She has come out and said that she's not standing down. So there's no hint she's going to do that anytime soon. But I think that pressure is going to mount over the next 24 hours.
Yeah, I did wonder, actually, if she would, decide to become the kingmaker and perhaps in a return for, a nice job in a future cabinet, but it doesn't seem like she will.
Yeah, and as you were saying, I think she was criticised by some people for rowing in behind Liz Truss last time round. So would she do that again if she's looking at a senior job? I from the conversation I was having yesterday evening with someone on her team, I can't see her stepping down. But as things get closer and it becomes more obvious she might not make it onto the ballot, maybe yesterday we could see a last-minute intervention.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see that for sure. Damian Green also made the point, didn't he, that, look, it's not good for the Conservative Party to bypass the members and not have a contest. It's not good for them to be seen to be stitching up the process. And he was effectively saying that, look, if the deal has been done, which, as you say, we probably don't think it has, between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, that's not a great look. How much pressure do you think there will be on whoever is the next leader to go to the public to call an election?
So Labour obviously want to see that happen. The SNP want to see that happen. The Lib Dems want to see that happen. Unsurprisingly, Labour riding high in the polls, they know that they would potentially do really well in an election. So I think what might happen now is, obviously, whoever becomes Prime Minister, it would be like a turkey voting for Christmas. They would not push ahead with that because they know it would be bad for the Tories. I think if it becomes clear that whoever becomes the next Prime Minister still can't keep this party together, we still see chaotic scenes. I think there is so much poison in the blood that this is a Tory party that is ungovernable, basically. Then that is when these calls for a general election might become deafening.
Yeah, well, let's talk about some of those calls for a general election, shall we? Because we talked to Lisa Nandy on the programme as well, Labour's shadowed Levelling Up Secretary, to get her thoughts on the contest.
Whether it's Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak or any of the other contenders who've been floating around this weekend, essentially what the Tory party is about to do is bring the arsonists in to try and put out the fire that they started. It's just not good enough. We need not just a change of Prime Minister, we need a change of government.
There you go, Lisa Nandy on the programme today. It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because whoever is the next Prime Minister, it's going to be an awful job, isn't it? I have to say. You look at the £40 billion black hole that we think we have. Lisa Nandy's talking about, another windfall tax. That's another £8 billion. But that leaves another, £32 billion to fill. And Boris Johnson, again, talking about the mandate from the 2019 election. Well, things have changed since then. It's going to be very difficult to deliver on that manifesto with the economic outlook that we see now.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. I mean, Boris Johnson, I think, is someone that likes big spending projects, has talked obviously a lot about levelling up. That was a big part of his manifesto. He likes to spend money on things that will, be part of his legacy. Obviously, the economic picture has changed since he was Prime Minister. Will he be someone that can comfort the markets? Will he be someone that can turn the tide on the economy? I mean, I think a lot of people would say that Rishi Sunak is the one that can steady the economy. So we don't know, what his sort of new pitch will be for that. I think what is also, interesting is the fact that our government department, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Are government departments able to function? I was talking to a couple of civil servants last week who were saying they're just waiting to find out who's going to be their next Secretary of State. And this was before Liz Truss had even gone. It's quite hard to actually get the business of government done when you don't know who's going to be your Secretary of State at the end of the week, when you're going to have to brief someone all over again. So I think and there are people who say the Tories can't get into the habit of getting rid of their leaders once you do it once. Does that mean that, Boris isn't working, let's do it again? I think there are people who think this is a party that obviously needs to come together, but that actually the important job of running the country isn't happening.
Can I have a quick listen to Lord Jim O'Neill? We asked him about the economic situation. He's had experience in the Treasury and also in the Northern Powerhouse. Let's listen.
Consistent with me sitting on the independent crossbenches, I shouldn't really have an opinion on such matters, I suppose. But I think if you look at what each has said about these issues in the past, Rishi obviously would be the safer pair of hands. I think certainly fair enough to say that the markets are conditioned for the kind of view that Rishi would currently have, whereas with Boris, as we know, we don't quite know what you're going to get, let's say.
That's an understatement, isn't it? You don't know what you're going to get with Boris Johnson.
I mean, it is incredible just to take stock of where we are. Tomorrow, we will know who is on the final ballot. I think there's two options, really. Either a coronation for Rishi Sunak or the former Prime Minister and the Chancellor that brought him down head-to-head up against the membership. It's unless Penny Mordaunt has a miraculous recovery.
It's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? It really is. And I actually did think that by this time we might know if it was going to be a coronation or a contest, and we still don't know, do we, to be honest?
I think that maybe gives you a sense that the numbers could be
closer than we thought.
Yeah, potentially.
Ali, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on the show today. Well, that is it from Sophy Ridge on Sunday The Take this morning. What a week it's been. I just can't even get my head around it. We will have the podcast very shortly with you. That will be with myself, Scott Beasley, our producer, and Liz Bates, our political correspondent, around lunchtime. In the meantime, hope to see you Wednesday night, 9 p.m. For Sophy Ridge on Sunday The Take, where not Sunday, Sophy Ridge The Take, on Wednesday, I should say. You can tell it's been a week, can't you? Great to have you with us. See you next time.